Tim, you have a great column out today about why Trump came back to New York City. I mean, this is a place that he left a few years ago, but it was a place that also built his fortune. Why did Trump come back here?
I don't think it was strategy, Tim. It makes no sense to come to New York if you're at the tail end of a race in which 7 swing states, New York not being one of them, is going to determine the outcome. I think he came for personal reasons. You know, he is a New Yorker to his core, and I think he's decamped to Palm Beach, but he'll always be a New Yorker. He wants the city to love him. You know, he got tried in 3 different trials that ended up with very embarrassing judgments for him that sort of seemed like the end of his run here. But he clearly wasn't done with it. And I think he came back to Madison Square Garden in part to show that he was still around to New Yorkers, but probably more importantly, New York's the media capital of the world. And I think he wanted a lot of eyeballs and he wanted a lot of attention for what he had to say on Sunday. I think what came out of that convention or out of that rally is something we should really reflect upon. But he did come, I think, for the media scrutiny.
I want to get into what we should be reflecting upon, but I want to go back to, you have come into this studio and talked to us about Donald Trump being a master of media, and he understands, right, the optics of being at Madison Square Garden, and a huge crowd around him and kind of laying it out there.
And, you know, sort of repeating the roll call of speakers who were at the RNC in July. I was there. It was very similar to the RNC. Hulk Hogan showed up again. He ripped his shirt off. Trump gave a closing speech that was somnambulant and rambling, and I don't know if it did anything for him again, tactically or strategically, but it allowed him to sort of indulge his own need to be in the spotlight.
In terms of some of the folks that spoke at yesterday's rally, it does seem like obviously, there were some things that have gotten a lot of media attention, and most or many Americans would be or are appalled by what was said in a nation that is, you know, the result of immigrants. Having said that, what's your understanding of campaigns and how much the Trump team knew who was going to be there, what they were going to say in terms of what they said at the rally?
Well, I mean,
because they seem to be backing off, saying, "Oh, you know, a little bit."
Yeah, like, I mean, so the rally was a fountain of misogyny, racism, xenophobia, a lot of talk about the other. I don't think it's partisan or ideological to make that observation. It's just about tolerance and core values. And there were heinous, ugly things said on that stage. Whether or not Trump's political team vetted the speakers who came out, I mean, there were, you know, sort of C-list comedians and
I didn't know a lot of the names.
And who just, you know, became sort of like fraternity bros, screeching racist rants. If they didn't vet them, they should have. If they did, then they shouldn't have let them on the stage. They were on the stage because they're articulating part of what Donald Trump's message is, which is that he's threatened by the other. His campaign is threatened by the other. They define the other broadly, whether it's China or people of color or immigrants or Democrats or women, on down the list. And there was a lot of that last night.
Tony Hinchcliffe, the comedian that we're all talking about, his joke that is getting a lot of attention today is about comparing Puerto Rico to a pile of trash in the ocean. The Trump campaign did something rare, and they actually came out and said that wasn't part of their view. It's not often that they'll rebuke people who speak at their rallies. Tim, what was notable to me, though, and it wasn't even a rebuke, but what was notable to me is that was sort of the only part that they distanced themselves from.
Right. I mean, there was you know, equally horrific stuff said about Kamala Harris and her race and her gender and her nationality. Also, you know, Hinchcliffe may have been a comedian, but what he said wasn't a joke. It was a racist smear. And I would argue that probably they thought it might be safe to put that in the mouth of a comedian, so there was deniability. Oh, can't you just take a joke if we gotten too politically correct, that you just can't see something funny about slagging an entire territory? So
fair to say that the Trump campaign accomplished what it set out to do yesterday, or is the fact that we are focused on this and not his sit down with Joe Rogan that aired on Saturday the focus of what we're talking about?
Well, you know, at one point during Trump's comments at the Garden, he said, you know, the Republican Party is the party of inclusion, and I really like that. While everything being said around him was as divisive as imaginable. So if their goal was actually to embrace this idea that the Republican Party could be a unifying force at a moment when we have great political polarization, they failed utterly. The other way to interpret that is they actually aren't serious about any of that, and they're willing to indulge racism or extremism in the service of Trumpism and Trump's own candidacy.
There's what Donald Trump said and the others said on stage, but there's also all of the Americans and voting public that were around them that didn't necessarily boo, didn't necessarily walk out. And I guess, like him or not, Donald Trump, I constantly think about half of America who are okay with this.
That is a great observation, because it's a little simplistic to simply point the finger at Donald Trump. He is an outcome as much as he's a cause of these things. And he represents something that's been in the United States for a very long time. We fought a civil war here.
Right.
Slavery existed here, on and on and on. And I think people have to decide what they want to say their authentic values are, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican. When it comes to, I think, racism and sexism and this kind of vitriol, no one should embrace it.
You know that vitriol from Donald Trump directly, right? You are the subject of a lawsuit from him, wrote a book on him. If there is a second term in the White House, what's your biggest fear?
Well, I think Trump has told us what that's going to be. I think.
Do you agree with those, though, Tim, that say, "Oh, it's just show," and he's not going to actually do all that stuff? Forgive me for interrupting.
No, that's fine. I think he deeply wants to do these things. I think he has authoritarian impulses. I think he wants to weaponize the Justice Department against his enemies. He said he's going to do that. I think he wants to silence dissent within the country. He said he wants to do that. I think he wants ideological sniff tests at public schools. He's a book banner. He is going to institutionalize things in this country that most Americans aren't used to being around. And I think we have to really think about what that means.
Why do you think we've seen such a silence, at least this time around, from corporate America, from large media organizations, a couple in the news right now over the last week, the Washington Post and the Los Angeles Times, for coming out and saying we're not going to endorse anyone this time around? Why do you think we're seeing that silence right now?
Well, because, people become cowed by power. And I think the anticipation in recent weeks is that Trump's polling numbers have improved against Harris. If he becomes president again, certainly businesses have reason to wonder whether or not he'll weaponize the powers at his disposal of the federal government against them. The media is concerned about it. Everyone's concerned about it because the presidency is a powerful office. And I think people are hedging their bets. The issue is, do you hedge your bets at the expense of ethics and decency and democracy and other values, or do you hedge them for just raw self-interest and a lack of courage?